This is the Global Podcast Network, where executives and professionals connect, share, and inspire. Stay tuned for the conversations that drive success.
Welcome back to the show. We are honored to have Thomas Perron back with us, our MSN NP. That's right. He has his own private practice here in New York City, and he's joining us today to talk more about the comprehensive psychiatry office that he has that's helping people in person, virtually, and so much more. So first and foremost, welcome back. How are you today?
Very good. Thank you, Jill. I appreciate you having me back. It's
Well, thank
wonderful to
you.
be here.
Well, for the new timers out there may not know anything about you, would you mind
Mhm.
just telling us a little about what it is you do specifically? Thank you.
Sure. So I practice in New York for about 30 years now and throughout many different systems, emergency rooms, clinics, shelters, and my own private practice as well. And so what I do now is essentially a little bit of everything. I work throughout several diagnoses in general psychiatry. I offer evaluation and medication management. I have an office here in Manhattan that I've had for 25 or almost 30 years.
Wow.
And so we see people in person. As well, we have a robust virtual arm, so we see people virtually and as well in person. So it's a combination of based on what the patients need.
Great. And just want people to know that you are board certified and you are a nurse practitioner in
Yes,
psychiatry. And
that's right.
you have many years of experience helping so
Yes,
many people. So thank you so much again for joining us and
sure,
working with us today. And I know there's a lot that you want to conquer about, how you're helping people. And there's someone out there that may be affected, Let's talk a
sure.
little bit about, today's show. What in particular did you want your listeners and viewers to know?
Well, I think, when we've talked a little bit about different things, systems, right? And so in systems in the way that medicines work in the very small microscopic way, and then the way that they work in the therapeutic benefit in the individual, and the way the individual operates within the community, and then the community with a system. Throughout those scenarios, if you will, its access is it's seemingly one of the more challenging aspects of psychiatry. Is that there are a couple of things working against it. Is that there's a tremendous need. The demand for psychiatric treatment and services and evaluations as the as people become more aware and more accepting, and the stigma drops off of the mental health that we've seen in the past few decades, more
Yeah.
people will access that system. However, that system has always been strained. To try and get an appointment for a patient, insured or otherwise, is a difficult thing to do. Even going into a private practice where you are insured or even paying out of pocket, and all by all rights, everything is lined up to access treatment. It may be a long time to get that treatment, and we've all experienced this when we've tried to make an appointment and the appointment is months off.
Yep.
If you've got something going on that is really putting you into psychiatric distress, months away is a difficult thing. And when we look at folks who can access the commercial system and the private system, they still do have problems accessing care, and it's for that reason is the delay in access to treatment, but also a shortage in providers. Psychiatric providers have been in short supply for a really long time, and even in the setting now today, with the way that we comprehensively treat, say, depression. Depression is actually treated more often out of a primary care office than a psychiatry office. And the reason is because it's very difficult to find an appointment for
Yeah.
psychiatry. And primary care has to do most of the heavy lifting in the context of depression and
Just funny you
anxiety.
said that because my son, he's only 10, but I spoke to his regular primary care last month. We had
Hmm.
a little meeting, and I think there's a behavioral issue happening and with me at home and affecting him. So she's like, all right, I'm going to contact you. Stony Brook University is where we live, like the Stony Brook, medical center out
Hmm.
here on
Hmm.
Long Island. And she's like, all right, we're going to contact you. We'll get an appointment with the psych team. She called me a few days later. She's like, I'm sorry. The psych team said they're booked up for like 8 months, so you can't
Yep.
even see them. I'm like, what?
Yep.
Yeah. So she's
Yep.
like, I'm going to send home paperwork to see if we could do some evaluation, you, me, him, the teacher.
Right.
Yeah.
And and sometimes those are the things that we have to do to really kind of make sure that we can at least assess for a need, right? I mean, that's
Yeah.
even before you can even get in the door and get your evaluation, and then God forbid a treatment plan that spins out of that. And I think, even in the setting of folks who have resources and can access the system, and they do get access, but then maybe they are 6 months off before they can find an appointment. And then you end up scrambling, right? Because now I have to find something. And many times we'll make decisions. And unfortunately, when we're in a bind, and this is true of the human condition, and unfortunately, it shouldn't be true, but when we're in a bind, we start to make decisions we normally wouldn't make. And so when those kinds of things are coming into play, when we're starting to talk
Yep.
about psychiatric treatment, we end up in places that we might not be best served
Yep.
because it's better than nothing. And that
Correct.
better than nothing many times starts to spin into the community service, and the community service is really kind of an interesting thing because it's a mirror of the commercial system. So just like what we were talking about, Jill, in the context of if you can access the system, being able to find somebody who can treat you, and then being able to access that person in a
Yep.
way that gives you treatment before 6 months or before the holidays roll around is a difficult bid. If you have a child or a family member, if you yourself are feeling bad, the last thing that you want to do is hurry up and wait. And so a 6 month wait on an evaluation to determine what kind of treatment you need is a very difficult question to answer, and a lot to ask a patient to put up with. And when we even look a bit further, part of this has been that this system has had these historic problems for decades. And the community system actually reveals these problems, I think, a bit better because they're so clear in the access and consistency in treatment. And I know that I've spoke about this a bunch about once we find treatment, we need to access that treatment and then provide consistency in treatment. And I struggle with that, and all of us do in our private practices to make sure that the patients that we are obligated to take care of, that we take care of properly, but to also produce access to folks who need care. And so within the best circumstances, that is a struggle. And so if we take a step out into community service, and look at that from systems to person to community and further, that system really is very strained, and I think has been the hallmark of why psychiatry kind of gets this bad rap, where we have in New York City, we have very busy emergency rooms so that they're specialized in the psychiatric ERs, and even CPEP is what they're called. And so what we can do is treat somebody acutely for a few days without having to bring them upstairs. And because it's as we talked about, to get them into the ER is one thing, to get them out of the ER is one treatment plan, to get them out of the unit is another one, and then to keep them into the community is another goal. So that one person has all of these resources spinning around them, and it's expensive. And so we have an ER visit and a stay, maybe an admission, and now the person is out into the community. And if this is somebody who historically has suffered from like schizoaffective disorder or bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, some of the chronic and persistent mental illnesses, they can be quite impairing. And in the old days, they had these big, giant, huge state hospitals, and there are still a few of them around. But it used to be that, and for lack of a better term, we would warehouse mentally ill folks who would end up on our streets and in our shelters and such, and they would go and many times would never be seen again. They didn't have a lot of advocacy. There wasn't a
Oh,
lot of patient rights at the time.
yeah.
And the term of warehousing became kind of synonymous with the long-term treatment of psychiatric patients. During that time, the deinstitutionalization movement in the 60s and 70s became about, and many of the social programs that we saw during that time, this dovetailed in on those. And so the deinstitutionalization of these large facilities, particularly in the New York State mental health system, Pilgrim State Hospital, Kirby Hospital, Willowbrook, very, very famous hospitals that were famous not only for their size, but also for their dereliction in some instances back then. We didn't know a lot about psychiatry, so it was a different animal back then. However, in bringing those people into the community, Now we have another stressor.
Yeah.
Now the private practices who are already stressed now have a shelter population or a homeless population or a partially or precariously housed population because patients who are chronically persistently schizophrenic tend to not have the resources. They're not employed, so they don't have commercial insurance. They typically have the public insurances, which many times are hard to access. So even in the scenario that we talked about, Jill, where we have resources and want to access the commercial market, somebody who is living in a shelter and maybe on
Yeah.
social benefits and using public insurance, just to find a facility that's willing to accept a very sick person who has very limited resources is a challenge. And the system here in New York is set up so that now it's called something different, but there were Article 31 mental health clinics, and I've spent a great deal of time working in those clinics
Okay.
and still consulting in one in Harlem. And in which case maybe we can talk a little bit about that in the future. But in the setting, what these systems were set up to do was to be a catch-all so that we could discharge people from long-term care, bring them into the community, put them into supportive housing where they have case management and resources to help them on site, and then as well to provide care. And when we look at that, that is a monster scenario just for one patient to go through all of those resources. And when we look at that and we multiply that just in the tens of thousands, millions of people who are running through the New York City programs, it becomes a daunting task. And I think, the reason that I wanted to kind of shoot my mouth off about this today was because I think it does mirror the exact scenario as to what we talked about earlier, is that there is some aspect of obstacle in accessing treatment in the psychiatric sphere, and it can be because of lack of resources. It
Yeah.
can be because of lack of providers. It also can be just because people don't know to access the system, and let's face it, if the system bucks at us a little bit and makes it a little bit harder to do, that's a really good excuse to drop off that system and to say, you know what, maybe it's just too difficult for me to get this appointment to get my assessment for my kid or for my depression.
Yeah.
And many times it can be very frustrating, as like in the example that you gave, when you're trying to access care for somebody, no matter what it is, whether it be a hangnail or for depression, nobody wants to hear that it's 8 months away.
Nope, not at all. You're right. And I'm living proof of it, right? Yeah, wow. Thank you for sharing this. And if
Sure,
you are
sure,
just tuning in, just want to remind everyone who we're talking to, our
sure.
nurse practitioner and friend here, Thomas Perron, obviously based out in New York City. And just curious, are you able to treat and work with only those in New York State, or are you licensed in other states?
Yeah, no. So just in New York State at this point, right now, the rules about virtual treatment allow us to operate within our state. During the
Okay.
pandemic, we had reciprocity. We could operate throughout different states. But right now, I practice in New York, and then of course, obviously, in greater New York City in person.
Perfect. All right. Sorry to interrupt. We just got to
No, no.
remind everyone. What else are we talking about today?
So, I think when we talk about again access to treatment, one of the things that we really want to that everybody should get a look at, whether or not it's ourselves, whether or not it's a family member, or even somebody that we know, is that when we have somebody who is in distress and they are trying to access these kinds of systems, one of the things that we can do as friends or family members or such, is that it may not be that like if somebody here needs a physical, we would just go ahead and take a look around, find our doctor, find a doctor that took our insurance, and very quickly go ahead and make that appointment and be able to do that. The emotional sequelae, the overwhelming sense of the decision making that plays into psychiatric care is I think important. Now, everybody goes through, if you are going through medical and you're going through a surgery, you're going through a procedure, they should be anxiety provoking, and we should think about those things and those kinds of issues. Now, somebody accessing care now, and obviously, and I've said this before, I love my doctor. I just don't like to go to her, but I would go to her if I need to. And however, in seeking psychiatric treatment, there's an additional obstacle, not only in what we talked a little bit about today, in that the difficulty in finding care and paying for care and getting the insurance and all the other systems that are in play, but it's the actual pivot point for the person trying to seek care. And that it's a difficult thing, I think, for people to have the insight to get to a point where, if they've been white knuckling it through symptoms, to finally decide that they're going to access care. And that may be not in the first call to the provider, not even looking around. It may be a call to a friend or a family member, and many times that person is coming to us as a source of support. And it's wonderful to be able to offer that support. However, many of us can feel overwhelmed when we have somebody coming to us like that, and we don't want to say the wrong thing. And oh my goodness, I have my own problems, and lots of different things. And so we want to try and be helpful and empathic. But one of the things that I think, when we are trying to help prop up our loved ones or people in our lives, is to encourage them to access the system. And that, despite the troubles that we've had that we've talked about in accessing long-term high quality care, is that there are systems that are out there, and that and that we want to be mindful, if that is somebody is at a point where they've hit the decision, where they're reaching out for help, whether they are calling in to us, whether they are calling to their family, whether they are calling the 988 mental health support lines, or 911 because they're in acute distress. The issue here is that if we have people around us that we care about, and we know that they are reaching out to us, and we're a little concerned that they're wobbly, help them access that care. Encourage them to do that. Be accepting of the fact that they may be going through something. Everybody does. The part of the human condition is a strange thing, because when we talk about anxiety is really just the overexpression of a normal human condition, right? So if we are feeling anxious, it's normal to feel anxious. But if we're feeling really particularly anxious, and it's getting in the way of doing things, it's getting in the way of us being the person that we want to be, that's one of the things that we have to really decide when it is that it gets this bad, so that we have to access treatment. And I guess one of the things that I would say, in kind of wrapping up here, is that we want to encourage the people around us and ourselves to not let it get that bad. The worst case scenario is if you're feeling bad and you access the mental health system, and you say access my office, and I do an evaluation and say that there's something there. Maybe we can offer some help. Or if it's not for us, maybe we need a therapist who and I work with a large network, and so we can get somebody to kind of help with that. Or maybe it's just something that we needed to maybe help, some guidance and some patient education. However it works out, at that point, that person, I would bet dollars to donuts, feels a little bit better. They've accessed the system. They've been able to ask some questions. They've gotten some confidence in what their next step would be if they do access the system. Many times patients will get very apprehensive when they make a phone call or they try and access the system, and they get concerned about telling me how bad they're feeling, because I guess they're afraid I'm going to GPS them and get an ambulance to scoop them up. Now, to say that not to make light of it, but in the entire wealth of intervention is available to us. And as long as we can get our loved one or ourselves in front of somebody, we may get to everything is okay, attaboy, keep doing what you're doing, pat on the back, or we may actually get to very acute scenarios. However it works out, they're all appropriate for access. because they all walk out with a little bit better understanding of what their next move is. And I think that whether that next move is treatment, therapy, medicine, inpatient, outpatient, whatever it is, at least now we know. And so I think when we remove those aspects of the unknown, it helps everybody to be able to assist our family member in assessing and accessing care and navigating the system, or even ourselves, so that we can kind of muster it up and not feel all the things that we used to feel, shame and all the things that used to keep us from doing those things. I think that if we can kind of keep our eyes on each other and ourselves, that it makes it easier to keep the conversation out in the open, and because mental health really just operates in secret, and so if we continue to talk about it, then I think we can continue to treat.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you so much. We still got plenty more time, but
Sure.
wow, you are on a roll, and it's always a good thing. And mental health is super important. When is a Mental Health Awareness Month, by the way? Is that May?
I believe it is May. Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
feel like in your field, I mean, you've been doing this for what, over almost 20 years now?
About, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, like I mean, mental health. It's something that I feel like was never was talked about a lot back in the day. And I
Sure.
think the pandemic, everyone talks about mental health now, which is a good
Right.
thing.
Right.
At the same time, were we always all overwhelmed and kept it in? Do you think, as human beings, did we just hide our mental health problems and feelings back then because we felt we'd be judged? Is that something you're seeing with a lot of people?
It's kind of interesting. I have a lot of folks who come in and say, this happened. I noticed this started to happen during the pandemic, and many of the things that happened
Mm-hmm.
during the pandemic, I think, there's certain things like
Yeah.
social isolation was a big thing. Everybody was away, and then there was structure and support that, I think many of us, although we pined for, oh, I'd love to be able to work at home and never be able to go to
Yeah.
the office and everything else, there is a benefit to going in and having human contact and making eye contact and seeing people and having a structure and those kinds of things. So I think that many of the things that spun out of the kind of the increase in mental health referrals and people seeking treatment was because we were under a great deal of stress. Everybody was just like, here in New York, we were just, it was anxiety provoking in the best case scenarios. And then I think as well, there was a lot of, because of the structure and support, and people were kind of left to their own devices, there was a lot of self-reflection. And so there was some folks who had maybe underlying anxiety or even attention deficit stuff. And if you had mild, untreated, unattention, like inattentive ADHD during the pandemic, that was going to come to light. If you were going to try and keep to your own schedule and be in front of a Zoom computer all day for 8 hours, and those kinds of things might be an easier thing to keep subdued if you're in the office in a cubicle and you have people around and there's structure and you be at a certain time at a certain place. When the pandemic hit and people were kind of left to more fluid kind of schedules rather than the benefit, I think that some folks found that to be really somewhat of a drawback. So since that time, I've been seeing many folks who tell me about distractibility and anxiety and those things since that pandemic hit. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that, it was a time that
Yeah.
at the same time as well, there was a big public health push to make people aware, right? Although we had this giant, horrible, virus out there, that there was also a mental health crisis. And so I think people became very aware that there were resources out there during the pandemic.
Got it. Well, thank you so much. All right. We still got 3 minutes left in the show. How did you kind of want to sum up today for everyone?
Well, I think, for what it's worth, it all kind of dovetails into all the topics that I've been kind of mouthing off about today. And it's a system
Mm-hmm.
that really has been taxed for a really long time, and that it's a very expensive system. And that in the best case scenario, even in with the stripped down kind of not concierge practice, it becomes very, very expensive, particularly in the context of some of the societal pieces that spin out of this. And so even folks who have resources and can operate in the commercial market, a debilitating episode of depression or bipolar mania or such can be such a disruptive force in someone's life that luckily, if they do have resources and support and such, then that person, although is going to be disruptive, can engage in treatment and hopefully regain some wellness. On the other side of that coin, somebody who doesn't have those resources is really going to have a much different outcome. And many times we'll see this repeat over and over again. And so I think what both of those scenarios illustrate is again the kind of beating a dead horse here is to access the system, as frustrating as it is to be relentless and to not be overwhelmed with a system that has historically been overtaxed and now is still the same. But the only benefit to now, as opposed to in the 60s and 70s and even back 20 years ago, is that we know how to do this better. And that although the system is still taxed and that it's still difficult and it's expensive and all those things, the people who are in this system and the medicines that we're using and the treatments that we're employing now are orders of magnitude better than anything we've ever had before. So I think that really, to tell you the truth, it's just really a matter of being able to expand that system, to expand that access and get those people in so that we can then try to maintain a level of wellness. And this comes, at that point, it becomes what's important. Money, social justice. It starts to become a much larger problem than just one person taking their meds so that they are okay. But it starts there. And so I think in that scenario, from the microscopic all the way to the systems, is kind of where I'd like to leave you guys today.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much. And how can we reach out to you?
So you can get me at tperronpsychiatry.com. That's my website. And then I'm also I'm all over ZocDoc. So to access my panel or my calendar, ZocDoc or my website, they're both linked together. As well, my office number is and a Google Voice number that you can actually text and leave a voice number is 631-743-6647. And we're around all the time. We're online. You can email us. You can access us by way of phone, and we don't have an 8-month wait list, not yet. So if somebody does reach out, we will be able to see you
accommodate you sooner. Thank you. I'm working on my. Thank you so much, and
you got it.
Having you back, and hopefully we'll chat again next week. Thanks so much.
You got it. Thank you so much, Jill. Bye-bye.
This is the Global Podcast Network, where executives and professionals connect, share, and inspire. Stay tuned for the conversations that drive success.